Hello, heroes. Today we are talking about a pressing topic for many people, a thing on people's minds in normal times, in times of fear and things like that. We're talking about the Jewish afterlife. So if you have questions about this topic, please join us in the chat. Jump right in, ask the questions that you have. Just so you know, the format of this particular video, if you haven't seen one of my videos lately, is this is going to be a live studio recording for the Jew Curious Show podcast. I've got a few of these in the bank, and I'm working on editing them to release them into the Jew Curious Show podcast universe, multiverse. I don't know, your theories are as good as mine. So please bear with us. This is a little bit like running a radio show and sitting in for a live studio recording of a radio show. I got this inspiration from when my wife and I went to see Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me at the Greek Theater. And I thought, wow, what a great idea for a live video / podcast production. So it's not going to be a 5-minute video or a 3-minute video that's going to give you all the answers to the questions you have. Certainly not a single answer to this important question that the Jewish tradition has had multiple answers for over the course of our history. And so that's the one thing that I want people to be prepared for up front, is that barring reliable reports from the afterlife, the Jewish tradition over the course of, let's say, thousands of years has posed multiple hypotheses to answer the question, what happens after we die? And so in this podcast, I'm going to caution you to have an open mind. I know this is a very sensitive topic for people. It's a difficult topic. Many of us have lost people, and we wonder where they are now. It's true for me. It's true for a lot of people I care about. Many people are very afraid of what happens after they themselves die. And that's a very common human thing. And so I just want to caution you, this is a sensitive topic. If you are sensitive about it, feel free to turn off at any time. I'm not here to give you a definitive answer today. I'm here to share many Jewish points of view, many points of view that are inherent in the Jewish tradition. Some of them directly contradict one another. And so I want you to be prepared for that. I don't want you to think that you're going to walk out of here with the definitive answer of what happens after we die. I'm just here to teach several Jewish points of view on that, to spark your questions, to spark further study on your own or with me or in the Jew Curious School community. And but nevertheless, even though we're not going to come out with a single easy answer today, I think it's important to have this discussion because I get questions about this all the time. I want to give you my best answers and the best answers I can find from the Jewish tradition. So with that, I just want to give a shout out to some folks in the chat before we start recording the podcast. We got some great people here today. We always have great people here. I'll say I'm not surprised, but I am impressed. We have people coming in from California. We have people coming in from all over the country. Let's see. We're at 7. I'm pretty sure we'll make Minion pretty soon. We got Jason coming in from Ireland. Welcome. That's Jason says, ouch, microphone. So I hope the microphone isn't too loud right now. Feel free to turn that down. Just trying to capture the best sound I can. I'm going to check my levels here in the studio, if you will. Studio being, my dining room. Let's see. We got Miriam here. We've got Budrod coming in from Georgia. And the microphone may need to be reseated. Are we getting static here, or is it just too loud? Let's see. Been having some trouble with a microphone in the last couple of days. So if let me know if the sound is bad. Let me know that in the chat. Again, if you're joining us for a brief YouTube video, we're more about let's see. Does that sound any better? Let's see. You have static on the microphone. Okay, we'll see if it gets a plug. I did the classic internet trick of unplugging it and plugging it back in again. It's been a week for technical difficulties, I'll tell you that. Okay, maybe I have too many microphones live here. Let me try something in the settings. Okay. Crumbs, guys. This has just been a bad luck week for technical difficulties. Output. Audio. Disable that. Disable that. Apply. Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Static only when I talk. Haha. Okay. All right. I'm going to try something here. This is just for us, the live posse. I'm going to fiddle a bit with my microphone for a couple of minutes. If you're watching this on a YouTube video at home, consider, going into the bathroom, getting a cup of coffee while I fiddle with the sound a little bit. One, two, 1, 2. See if that's a little bit better. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right, we'll see how that works. Let me know if you're having the same problems or different problems. I've done the unplug and replug thing. Talk, talk, talk. Yeah, Jason Brown says yes, perfect. All right. So this is a funny story. Yesterday, I got to be on the panel of an interview panel for a rabbinical student applying to the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, my alma mater here in sunny Southern California. And it was an interview over Skype because the candidate was coming in from Israel. And so various people in the room knew that I do YouTube videos, and so instantly I became the default tech support for this interview Skype session with a potential rabbi, with a potential rabbi from Israel. And I'm like, this feels just like Thanksgiving because I fool around with computers quite a bit. People assume that I know what I'm doing. I will reiterate, they do not teach digital media production skills in rabbinical school, not yet. I'm working on that. So, all right, everybody, enough time wasted on this. A little bitul zman is bitul Torah, meaning wasting time is wasting the opportunity for Torah study. So let's jump right into it. Okay. We'll do the podcast introduction, and then I will give some shout outs to the live studio audience for benefit of the podcast listeners. Hero, have you ever wondered what happens after we die? Well, of course you have, because you are a human being, and human beings have natural curiosity about this topic, perhaps some fear about this topic, because this is the great unknown. To date, we have few, if any, reliable reports from people about what happens after we die. And this is something that many people are looking for an answer about for themselves, for their own peace of mind, and in consideration for loved ones, and in consideration of loved ones whom they've lost. Today, we are going to talk about several Jewish views of the afterlife right after this bass. Going to take a little bit of a break here, count to 10 for a silence check. This helps me sweeten the sound a little bit before it hits the podcast. And away we go. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble for those inspiring opening beats. And thank you to the live studio audience who has joined us here today on YouTube for this discussion of the Jewish afterlife. Most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious show. I'm excited about the learning we're going to do together today. I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer or a warning or an asterisk. This is a sensitive topic. This is a difficult topic. I think innate in the human condition is a fear of death and a concern for what happens after we die. This is one of the two great questions I think most religions have to tackle. One is, why do bad things happen to good people? And we talked about that on a previous episode. The other is the career of the soul. Is death the end? Do we go on in any kind of conscious way? And Judaism has some things to say about that, but I want to emphasize that it has things to say about that. What I can't answer today is where your loved ones are who have passed, and where my own loved ones are who have passed. If you're looking for a definitive single answer, this is not the discussion that we're going to have today. But what I do want to offer you is multiple. But what I do want to offer you is multiple Jewish perspectives on this topic. As with most topics of import, we have been discussing these things for literally thousands of years, which means we have a variety of opinions. And again, barring reliable reports from the other side, opinions are what we will have to settle for today. Before we get started on this important topic, I want to give some shout outs to the people who have joined us in the live studio audience today. We're almost at Minyan, so I'd love it if one more person joins us, but I'm perfectly happy with who we have here today. We've got some great folks. Trig is here. Carla is here from sunny Southern California. And we've got Jason, my brother from Ireland, I believe. Everybody's sort of been troubleshooting with me, had a little bit of a fuzz on the microphone earlier. We are now, I believe, fuzz-free. Kathy is here from Southern California. Of course, Miriam from New Hampshire, who says the snow has melted. Baruch Hashem. We've got somebody named Deals Durban. I don't know if that's your name or you represent a place in Durban that has deals, but I'm happy to learn with you today. Budrod coming in from Georgia. And Zach Russell is here saying hi. Hi, Zach. Glad to learn with you today. So let's get started. I will suggest that let's see, how should we go about doing this? So I have a bit of a talk prepared to give you some organization about insights of the Jewish afterlife. I would say feel free, as we are talking, to ask the questions that you have in the chat, share the opinions that you have. Again, this is a sensitive topic, so I want to be sensitive to different people's perspective, different people's concerns. But I also want to make sure I answer whatever questions you have as best I can, and I will encourage courage in asking your questions, because if you have these questions, I'm almost certain that other people have these questions as well, and you are doing them a favor by asking on their behalf. And we will learn as best we can today. Jason shares that Rabbi Sachs, presumably the former chief rabbi of the British Empire, says Judaism believes in life after death, but it is in life before death that we truly find human greatness. And I think that will bear out in the teachings that I want to share today. Because before we talk about the afterlife, I want to share the traditional Jewish view of de-emphasis on afterlife and instead an emphasis on our work in this world, in this life. Just pulling up text over here that I want to share with you. I want to make sure I quote it faithfully. There is There is a teaching in the Mishnah in Masechet Hagigah, when Hagigah talks about holidays and things, but, the Mishnah, the Talmud, rabbinic literature in general has lots of digressions. So in Hagigah, we talk a little bit about the mystical side of Jewish thought. And it says, whoever discusses four things, it is better that he should not have been born. That's a pretty bold statement, but here goes. Here are the four things. What is above, what is below, what came before, and what will be after. When we talk about the afterlife, when we talk about the career of the soul, we are getting into what is above and what is below and what is after. Not so much before, although that's related as well. This is a pole in Jewish thought about emphasis in this world and a de-emphasis on what people call metaphysics, the operation of the world beyond our ability to experience things like heaven and hell and what the universe was like before it was created and what the universe will be like after it ceases to exist in the way that we perceive it today. The rabbis, let's say approximately 2,000 years ago and a little before, that's the Mishnah was a early 1st and 2nd century redaction of previously existing oral tradition. So for over 2,000 years, we've had, I'll say, a debate between study of the world beyond our perception and focus on what we can do in the world within our perception. And there has been for a long time an emphasis in Judaism on what we do in this world. Judaism, many people have observed, is a religion of action over a religion of belief, whereas other faith systems require a kind of belief in a certain cosmology, a certain nature of the universe, a certain personage, if you will. Judaism doesn't have that emphasis on, you are in or out based on what you believe. And some of those beliefs are metaphysical beliefs, beliefs about the world beyond our perception. Judaism instead this is about our covenant with God, who gives us tasks, who gives us things to do in this world. And really, that's enough, in a sense. When people ask me questions about, okay, Rabbi, I'm terribly concerned about what happens in the next world, and if I have a good enough relationship with them that I could joke around a little bit, I'll say, really, you don't have enough mitzvahs to do now? You don't have enough to do in this world as a part of this relationship with God? Because I think that's where our tradition pushes us, in the sense of, okay, if you worry too much about what's next, you don't have your eye on the ball that's in front of you. And so we'll begin our discussions of the afterlife on this life, and the traditional push from the rabbis, since the times of the Pharisees, let's say, to say, let's focus on what's in this world, the difference that we can make, the mitzvahs that we can do, the bad things that we can avoid now, because that is something we have control over, right? That's something within our perception, within our control, within our capacity, within our responsibility. And that's a lot of work. That's enough for most folks to deal with without worrying what's in the next world. However, these questions are natural to the human condition. We wonder what was here before us, what will be here after us, what's above, what's below. And I think this resonance of theories about the afterlife come from a couple of different places. Again, I'll say native to the human condition is a fear of death. Is what we perceive now all there is? And when I die, does my consciousness cease? Am I erased as an identity? And that's a really daunting prospect for people. And so that's why when we talk about theories of the afterlife, these really resonate with human beings who are concerned about the cessation of consciousness, the cessation of power to influence the world, let's say. Another thing that drives us to explore what's in the next world is our own innate sense of justice and fairness. We discussed this in the previous episode on why bad things happen to good people and conversely why good things happen to bad people. We have this innate sense of fairness, that good action accrues good consequence, bad action accrues bad consequence, but this is contrary to our experience of daily life. Either in our own lives or in our observations of other people, we see this happen all the time, that people can live exemplary lives and yet suffer. And some people can live lives of scoundrels and lawlessness and selfishness and yet prosper. And so we are attracted to theories of the afterlife that seem to, let's say, balance the accounts in our sense of fairness in this world. And so many religious traditions, Judaism included, have ideas that people who did not benefit in this world in a way that reflected the good way that they lived receive, let's say, a greater reward in the next world, in the afterlife, in the world to come, or Olam Haba. And that people who are wicked in this world and yet benefited out of balance with their wickedness receive some sort of punishment. We like to see bad guys punished. We like to see good guys rewarded. And if we can't experience in this world, if we can't experience that in this world, we have hope that that happens in the next world. And this is true of Judaism. This is true of Christianity. This is true of many religions that have a concept that we would associate with, say, heaven and hell. And if I could just really quick bust one myth, some people think one of the attractive features of Judaism is that we have no hell. If you've heard that saying. So I'm going to bust that myth for you right now. We do have traditional concepts that relate to, let's say, Christian ideas of hell. They're not equivalent. They're not exactly the same. But we do have notions of a kind of balancing, a kind of purgatory, a kind of suffering, a kind of cleansing suffering that happens after death for people who could benefit from that kind of cleansing. And we'll talk about the different theories of that here in a moment. We've had Carmen join us in the chat. Welcome, Carmen. Glad to see you. And we'll continue here with let's say, the original idea of Jewish afterlife that we see in the Tanakh, and that is the concept of Sheol. And Sheol is let's see, that's a big statement that says what Sheol is. We come across Sheol in the book of Genesis and Sefer Bereshit. There are many places, let's say, throughout the Tanakh, but especially we see this in Sefer Bereshit with the discussion of the patriarchs and the matriarchs and sort of the original Jewish families, that when they pass, it says they are gathered to their kin. They're gathered to their ancestors. There's another reference when it's talking about Yaakov, or Jacob, when his sons are concerned for his passing, they'll say, okay, if anything happens to Benjamin, my father will go down into Sheol bereft. And so we talk about Sheol as a kind of an underworld. When people thought of Sheol, they thought about some sort of, subterranean place akin to the Greek idea of Hades, let's say, this world that exists under our world where everybody goes. This isn't, heavens above and hells below. This is this notion that there is an equal afterlife for everyone, where people's ancestors have gone before us, and we will be gathered unto our ancestors there. And it's not so much discussed And so rabbis have looked at this and said, okay, is this a kind of eternal conscious existence in the underworld? Some rabbis have said, no, this is more of a metaphor for oblivion, right? Once you're in the ground, and that's where we bury people, consciousness ceases, and it's not like you have an eternal life in a cave or something like that. It's just this, the underworld is considered, people literally go into the ground when they're buried, and that's it. You could be gathered unto your ancestors in a physical way, because that's where your ancestors are. They're in the ground, and everybody goes back to the earth eventually. What we don't have a lot of discussion about in the Tanakh, with some rare exceptions, is this notion of a conscious existence in the afterlife. It pops up in the book of Daniel in chapter 12. There is some discussion of this in Isaiah in chapters 25 and 26, where we begin to see these ideas of the resurrection of the dead. God restores life to those who are dead in a kind of future messianic age. These are times in Jewish history where we were desperate for redemption, where we saw suffering all around us, where we saw death all around us. And we like to believe that there was a future era of peace in store for us, that there would be an anointed leader, and Moshiach, or where the word Messiah comes from, means anointed, that there would be a leader that led us into this era of peace. Unless you think there's just one of these, Saul, the king Shaul, was talked about as Moshiach. David was talked about as Moshiach, right? This just means an anointed leader who would usher in an era of peace. And in a few places in the Tanakh, in the canonized Jewish scripture, it talked about this era of peace containing a bodily revival of the dead. People who had suffered in this world would also get to enjoy this era of peace, this world to come, this Olam Haba. And so this is another, I'll say, popular, as in widespread and enduring theory of the Jewish afterlife, is Olam Haba, this new era of history after this world as we know it expires, with the anointed leader ushering in an era of peace in which swords would be beaten into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. Mankind would not again know war. Vicious beasts could lie down with gentle beasts, and no one would be afraid of being harmed. But this was sometime in the indeterminate future. And so, according to this theory of the career of the soul, when people die, their soul, while eternal, was in a kind of state of suspended consciousness where we don't have perpetual awareness of what's going on around us, or perhaps we do. Again, this is just a theory. But the idea was that when someone expires, their soul would go into kind of a stasis or waiting state until it would be restored to bodily physical life in Olam Haba. And with this, again, with our desire for a sense of justice, we have a couple of different ideas as to where your waiting room is. So one is, we often talk about as Gan Eden, which means the Garden of Eden, which we think about the story of Adam and Eve in this paradise before they took a bite of that apple, gained knowledge of good and evil and the responsibility for free will, and they were expelled. That's not the same garden. According to our tradition, that Garden of Eden was a physical space. We don't know exactly where it was. We just know we can't get back. There's an angel with a spinning fiery sword guarding the place. But Gan Eden was this sort of but Gan Eden, as we talk about it in the afterlife sense, is a kind of metaphorical paradise that's related to that original Gan Eden in a metaphorical way. So people who led, let's say, lives of goodness and righteousness would dwell in Gan Eden until Olam Haba, when they could be restored to physical existence. But it's not for everybody. Again, this is talking about we want those good people who suffered to have a kind of paradise in the next world, and we want those bad people who prospered to have some comeuppance. And so while I'll assent to the idea that there's no, let's say, eternal hell like we hear about in Christianity, Judaism does cotton to a concept of purgatory, right? Purgatory in the sense that purgatory in the sense that those misdeeds or missed opportunities in this world cling to us, cling to our souls, require some sort of purging process. And so we have, at least from Talmudic times, the notion of Gehinom, or you may have heard the word Gehenna. More often in the Talmud, it's referred to as Gehinom. Same word, different ending. So Gehinom was, let's say, an unpleasant place. This is much like the Gan Eden that we talk about, is a metaphorical space that refers to a physical space early in Breshit. Gehinom is a kind of metaphor that is named after an actual physical place that existed as, let's say, a really bad neighborhood around Jerusalem. Like in Judea, there was this place called Gehinom, and it was kind of like the county landfill, right? This was a place where people threw out garbage. There was fires of refuse being burned. There were desperate people who couldn't make a living, were picking through the trash. Very unpleasant place. Basically, the worst place that anyone living had ever seen. And so when they described a Jewish purgatory, they called it Gehinom. It's the worst place that they could think of. And this is a place in which people who have, let's say, things to make up for in their living existence, have those things to make up for purged in various ways. But this is a temporary state, right? Once you are purged of your misdeeds or your misopportunities, then your soul would ascend to Gan Eden. And this was your, let's say, waiting room for Olam Haba. And there is one mystical notion called kafakela, whereby kafakela means that the cup or the holder thing in a slingshot, right? I don't know if anybody here has had a slingshot or seen a slingshot, but in addition to the strings or the rubber bands of the sling, there's that little thing that holds the stone. And that's the kaf hakela, and that the soul is then pulled back in the slingshot and released, and flies, instead of through space, flies through time, reviewing the life that person had lived and observing every place in that life where you have transgressed, where you have hurt someone, hurt yourself, missed an opportunity to do good. And in reviewing your life, you become, let's say, cleansed or purged of those mistakes, of those errors, and your soul comes out on the other side clean and ready for Gan Eden. And so this is one mystical association with the afterlife. Again, it's one theory of many. But this idea of Olam Haba has been prevalent since, we'll say, at least the time of the Pharisees, of the early people who would become known as the rabbis that spawned rabbinic Judaism. Let's say the 1st or 2nd century before the Common Era. So again, we start in the Tanakh with an afterlife concept of Sheol, an underworld, a cessation of consciousness and a kind of oblivion. Later texts in the book of Daniel, which is very late in the canonization, as well as just a couple of sections from a very large text from Isaiah, discuss a kind of revival of the dead. Some people read this as a metaphor that those who have been ended, those who have been downtrodden, will be lifted up again. And this could be a lifting up in spirit. This could be a lifting up in all sorts of ways. From these texts, other monotheistic religions have said, oh, these are proof texts for the existence of heaven and a bodily resurrection of the dead in messianic times. And some Jews have read that as well, but some people read these as sort of a metaphor for when God redeems us at various times in our waking lives. We can feel dead and revived again. But there is this notion from at least Mishnaic times of Olam Haba, and when a person dies, their soul goes into a kind of waiting room, and the waiting room you get depends on how you lived your life. You may have to go through a sort of purgatory process before you get to Gan Eden, or if you were a righteous person, you can go straight to Gan Eden. And then when Mashiach when Mashiach ushers in this new era, we will all be restored to life in Olam Haba. And Olam Haba, that just means the world to come. There's not a lot of heavy descriptions of it, other than, Jewish people have a share in it. Righteous Gentiles have a share in it. This connects to the Noahide laws that we've talked about before. If you lived a good life, you don't have to be Jewish to have a share in the world to come. But people's shares, let's say, the size of their real estate, the size of their enjoyment, does depend on the kind of life we live in this world, right? And this is terribly effective in helping people live better lives. If you do good in this world, your experience in the next world will be better, right? And, if you need another reason to act right, there is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says this world is like the lobby or the waiting room for Olam Haba. You prepare yourself in the lobby for how you want to be in the main hall, in the banquet. It's like you're in the bar area of a really nice restaurant, and you if you're going into a nice place, you want to tuck in your shirt, tie your tie, make sure you're presentable, so that you can really enjoy what comes next. So in just a minute, we're going to get into some more Kabbalistic notions that begin to appear in Judaism in, let's say, the 16th century and really get revived in the Hasidic tradition of the 18th centuries and 19th centuries. But before we do, I want to go to the chat to see what people are asking about. So we've had Carmen join us. Val is here from Florida. Dorothy Sue, Dodie, welcome. Zach Russell asks, do we have any thoughts on reincarnation? Absolutely, that's what we're going to get into next. Kathy shares, knowing my past existence helps my current life be more focused. Talking about Kabbalah, Gilgul, realizing it's not a mainstream theory, but that's exactly what we're about to talk about. This notion of Gilgul HaNefashot, or the returning of souls, a Jewish idea of reincarnation. Budrad shares, Albert Brooks had a humorous movie called Defending Your Life about this review process and whether the soul ascends or remediates. Sometimes, we don't get expelled, but we do get detention. I'll put it that way. Jason shares, Jason shares a Jordan... a little trouble with my J's today. Jason shares a Jordan Peterson quote. Interesting. I'm not sure we understand anything about the role of consciousness in space and time. I don't think the world is the way we think it is. So that is the essence of metaphysics and mystical cosmologies. We'll get to in just a second. He continues, I'm not a materialist. Whatever is going down there at the subatomic level of matter is so weird that the people who understand it don't understand it. Again, I think this goes back to what our rabbi shared, that it's better to not think than to think about what's before, what's after, what's above, and what's below. And the reason the rabbis had this de-emphasis on mysticism is that they saw what happened when people dwelled on the mystical. There's another story. Let's see. There's another story I'll share. Again, I want to just grab my text because I don't want to misquote it. There's another story from the Babylonian Talmud, again from Masechet Chagiga, perhaps meditation on the Mishnah we shared earlier. Our rabbis taught that there were four who entered Pardes, which could also mean orchard or paradise. But here they were talking about a place of the revelation of mystical truths. The rabbis taught four entered the orchard. Ben Azai looked and died. Ben Zoma looked and went mad. Elisha ben Abuya looked and became an Apikoros, became a heretic. He disavowed all of his prior teaching. Only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and exited in peace. And for people who spent their lives in focused Torah study, they would observe that there were those who would get into the more mystical meditations. And once you get into those things, it tends to distract you from your responsibilities in this world. And so they have this parable of four great learned rabbis who approached these mystical truths, and only one left alive, sane, and let's say still Jewish, right? Who wasn't so perturbed that he either fell off the path, went mad, or died. And so this is why we discouraged, let's say, and this is why we discourage, let's say, mystical explorations until one is fully a mature adult. Some people say, minimum age 40. They're married, they have a family, they're established, they've got their career, their business is set up, they've got a stable source of income. And only once somebody has, let's say, fully lived a life in this world, should they allow themselves to reflect on the lives. Should they allow themselves to focus on, let's say, the career of the soul in the world beyond and mystical cosmologies and things like that, because they observed there be monsters, right? That's a place where people go insane, or at least neglect the mitzvot that we are supposed to do in this world. And yet, we do this all the time. And a lot of this comes from the work of a Rabbi Isaac Luria, a 16th century teacher who spent a lot of time in Sfat in Israel and had kind of a cohort of mystical scholars around him. One of his associates was Rav Yosef Karo, who eventually gave us the Shulchan Aruch, or the Code of Jewish Law. Another great product of this time in 16th century Sfat was Kabbalat Shabbat. And that's the Friday night service that precedes Mariv. When you go to a synagogue on Friday night, it starts with Kabbalat Shabbat. There's a lot of singing. There's the recitation of psalms and songs like Lecha Dodi, where we welcome in the bride or the queen of Shabbat. This came from these mystics who were in Sfat studying Kabbalah, studying mystical cosmology and things like that, how the world came into being. Developed different diagrams. If you've seen the Sfirot and other Kabbalistic diagrams of the nature of heaven and things like that, this came out of this time period. But they also really love Shabbos. And so they said, hey, just going into regular evening prayers on Shabbat is not enough. Let's have a special welcoming of the Shabbat queen or bride, and they invented Kabbalat Shabbat, which has nothing to do with Kabbalah in the sense of mystical study, but the word Kabbalah means receiving. And so they are receiving Shabbat, or Kabbalat Shabbat. So, just checking in the chat, seeing what's going on. So among the gifts that Rabbi Isaac Luria gave the Jewish world was a comprehensive cosmology and mystical study, including the career of the soul, the afterlife, as it were, which contained the notion of Gilgul HaNefashot. Like a gal is a wave. Gilgul means like a renewing, or like the way waves lap on a shore. Gilgul HaNefashot means the return of souls. This is a Jewish notion, in simple language, of reincarnation. Right? We do have an ancient understanding that souls are eternal. They come from heaven. When we pass, they return to heaven. They do not cease to exist like the physical body. A previous iteration of this was Olam Haba. The souls of those who depart go to Gan Eden, or go to Gehinnom for a little bit and then go to Gan Eden, and then they will be restored to physical bodies in the world to come. However, that's a long time to wait. And according to Rabbi Isaac Luria, these souls wouldn't just stay suspended until the Messianic age. They would return from time to time. And especially the souls of, let's say, tzaddikim, or righteous people, or particularly good people who did good work in the world, would come back and be restored to new bodies when additional work needed to be done. And some people think of this in a more, let's say, karmic sense. I'm less familiar with Hindu ideas of reincarnation. It's not so much where, if you're a bad guy, you come back as a bug, or if you're a good guy, you come back as a cow, which was apparently a nice thing there. It's more that the tzaddikim return to do work that God wants done in the world. Occasionally, and this a little brain bleep there for a second. And this goes back to another aspect of Luria's cosmology, which was that when God originally created the universe, or let's say this iteration of the universe, God created the universe out of vessels that would contain God's essence. However, when God emanated God's essence into these vessels, the vessels themselves were overwhelmed. They shattered, right, like little glass bulbs. And that everything that we perceive in this world, all matter, all perceptible entities, are actually fragments of these broken vessels. And our job as human beings in this world is to put those vessels back together again, to repair the world that has been broken since its creation, right? And if you've heard this phrase, repair the world, or tikkun olam, the original idea of tikkun olam had nothing to do with what we now perceive as maybe, let's say, liberal politics or social justice. The original idea of tikkun olam had to do with restoring the broken fragments of the original creation of the universe. And every time we do a mitzvah, fulfill a commandment from the Torah, some of which contain helping the poor, working for justice, and things like that, a couple of these fragments are put back together again. And so the job of human beings, and in Kabbalistic circles, they'll say the job of Jews, but I think it deserves greater attention than that, is to put these vessels back into the world by doing mitzvot, which some interpret as commandments from the Torah, some interpret as good deeds. Every time we do something good, whether perform a ritual or help somebody, some pieces of the universe come back together again. And it's the work of a lifetime to do this. But it is the work of a lifetime in the sense that these vessels can only be put back together by living people. And so the role of the, let's say, returning soul of the tzaddik in Gilgul HaNefashot is to come back to this world and continue the work of this world, because, as Luria would have us believe, that as awesome as heaven is, as nice as it is to be in Gan, as nice as it is to be in Gan Eden with other righteous souls and nearer to God, what God really wants from us is to repair this world. So even this theory of afterlife that contains reincarnation is for the purpose of this world being repaired, which goes back to our rabbis in Hagiga who were suspicious of, let's say, afterlife speculations, to say that the most important thing in Jewish thought is doing our best in this life, doing our best for people of this world. Again, even in Olam Haba, the notion is that we would not exist in heaven eternally, but that we would be eventually restored to life in this world. And so every, let's say, theory that we've talked about in Jewish, on the topic of Jewish afterlife, eventually leads us back to perfecting this world of our lived experience. So that's a lot to process. Again, I get this question all the time, usually at funerals. Where is Grandma? And is she with Grandpa? And I have a difficult time answering that question because, again, that's still something that I'm working out for myself, and what I believe is not necessarily going to be useful, helpful, or true for another person. My goal today was not to answer that kind of personal question that we ask in times of difficulty, but to give you different views that Jews have had over the millennia on the afterlife, without pushing you in one direction or another. I will say my own personal pursuit is for improving my life, improving my character, improving the quality of my deeds in this world, because I think that's the ball that God wants me to have my eye on, and I think that's enough. I don't focus too much on what's heaven going to be like or what's hell going to be like. And this is very different from how I was brought up in Protestant, let's say, Southern Protestant Christianity, where the entire focus of one's life should be on getting into heaven. Or don't worry about suffering in this world because the next world is going to be a paradise. I was recently at a lecture given by, I want to say he's sort of a moral philosopher, but he also talks about the biological basis for moral decisions and things like that. And he, as kind of an aside, he made this observation that Pentecostalism is an ideal religion for a post-capitalist society. And just trying to unpack what he meant by that is that the more desperate people's conditions are in this world, the more they tend to emphasize the world to come and de-emphasize this world over which they feel that they have no control. So not for nothing, the centers of Kabbalistic study, the study of mysticism, the speculation on the afterlife, the de-emphasis on our responsibility in this world has happened in Hasidic circles that arose in times of great desperation. The Baal Shem Tov came to teach his teaching in a time of great desperation and sadness in the Jewish world after we had a couple of people who claimed to be Mashiach falsely, and when they were proved to be false messiahs, the Jewish world just went into a funk. And so the Baal Shem Tov comes along and says, look, I know this world is terrible. Let's talk about the next world. And from the Baal Shem Tov, who was working in, let's say, the 18th century in Eastern Europe, we have the Hasidic dynasties that come up and also dwell on the next world and the unseen, because they lived in societies where people felt powerless to influence what happened in this world. I thank God that I was born in the United States of America, the country that has the freest exercise of religion in the world, in a time of prosperity and the time for the capacity for self-determination. So I don't come from that world. So for that reason, I think I'm more attracted to a philosophy within Judaism of focusing on what I can do, the difference that I can make in this world, and not sweating too much what's coming in the afterlife. That's my own particular take, not trying to push it on anybody, but of these options that I've talked about, that's the one that is most attractive to me. I also know Jews who have a very strong sense of attachment to Gilgul HaNefashot, who have some sense of what their prior incarnation might have been. And far be it from me to take that away from them, right? I can't say that they're wrong. Again, no reliable reports from the other side. However, that's not something that attracts me. And so maybe in my next life, if I get one, maybe I'll wake up to that truth. Who knows? But right now, I've got a lot of mitzvot to work on personally, a lot of tshuva to make in my own right, and I'm going to focus on that. Nevertheless, it was important to me to bring these different ideas to you because people have questions about this stuff. And not for nothing. We fear death. We fear what we don't understand, can't experience, don't have any reliable reports about. And so my goal today was to share these different concepts of Sheol, Olam Haba, Gan Eden, Gehinom, Gilgul HaNefashot. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions people have in the chat. If you didn't make the live session today, please feel free to throw your questions into the comments to this video. And I'll say anybody listening to this podcast who would, I'll get back to that later. So let's take a look at the questions. Jason shares let's see. Jason shares, dwelling on the after is missing the present, all right. Enjoy the now and do your best. Worry about the after. This I have learned from my Judaism studies, from writings thousands of years old. I'm with you, Jason. Again, there are alternative answers, but I like yours the best. Someone with someone with a name in Cyrillic says, "How did you learn about the vessels?" And I've learned this from reading into Isaac Luria and reading about Isaac Luria and other I had a Kabbalah teacher in rabbinical school who I didn't go deep into Kabbalah as some people did, but got a kind of an overview of it from from a scholar of Kabbalah. Trig shares, I used to believe you live your heaven and hell right now, so it's your choice. There are those who say that heaven or hell is how you experience life on this earth. Sometimes when I'm feeling a little snarky, I go to I go to a quote by Sartre who says, hell is other people. But that's usually when I'm upset with other people. So listen, I really appreciate everybody joining me today for this challenging topic, this personally difficult topic for some people, as well as an intellectually difficult topic. It's hard when the most important questions that we have to ask get the answer of, it's complicated. And there are many possible answers, each of which you can spend time dwelling on and studying on your own. Happy to discuss these with you as we have time. But I really appreciate the time that people have invested in this discussion today. And so I'm going to wrap this up with a few announcements for the Jew Curious Show podcast listener. And then, as usual, I'll hang around for a little bit after the chat if people in the live audience still have some questions. So just take a little sip of fuel. So before we wrap up, I want to thank everybody in the live studio audience today. Jason, Kathy, Trig, Carla, Carmen, so many people. James Smith joined us from Las Vegas. Glad to see you. Bud Rod from Georgia. Zach Russell. So many people had questions about this Gilgul HaNefashot or reincarnation. And so many people expressed their preference for the idea of focusing on this world. Even those tzaddikim who come back to inhabit new bodies are focused on the work in this world. So however you slice it, we have a lot to do in this world. I want to thank you, Hero, for listening to this episode today. Would love to hear your thoughts about this. You can go to the show notes page for this episode, share your thoughts in the comments. If you would like to join us in a future live studio recording of the Jew Curious School, of the Jew Curious Show, I highly recommend that you find me on YouTube. Just look for Rabbi John Carrier on youtube.com, and you will see on my channel page the schedule of upcoming live sessions that you can join, ask your questions, get your answers, and share that learning with other people who will be listening to this podcast in the future. And I think that would be a very nice thing for you to do. And I'll say thank you now for anything that you do in the future. Another great way to connect with this community is to join us in the Jew Curious Community Center. This is a private Facebook group, lovingly tended, carefully guarded, and troll-free, where you can share what questions you have, share your story, share your concerns, and share your support with other people who are on a journey just like you. To join the Jew Curious Community Center, just go to jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center. And if you share your email address, you will get a full list of instructions on how to join this wonderful community. And one last announcement, I want to make sure you know that this podcast is made possible by the Jew Curious School. This is a private online learning community for those who enroll to learn with me. Every week we have a discussion of the Parashat HaShavua, the Torah portion of the week, that is. We usually have another class on some topic, like, for example, right now we're talking about Pesach or Passover, how to prepare for your Passover Seder, how to conduct the Seder itself. And we talk about other holidays, other concepts like God and Torah and Israel and what those different things mean to different Jewish people. Plus, we have developing there a full introduction to Judaism course, the 101, the basics, so that you can get a good grounding on which to build your future learning. But my favorite thing about the Jew Curious School is the wonderful, supportive, kind, generous, smart community that we have built there over the last few months, where, again, people support one another, people answer each other's questions. I'm in there all the time answering what questions I can, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know heroes just like you on a much more close personal basis. If you're curious about that, go to jewcurious.school/info and learn all you like. Once again, hero, I really appreciate your listening to this show today. And until next time, peace. All right, everybody in the live studio audience, thank you so much for being here, asking great questions, sharing different thoughts, different ideas about the Jewish afterlife. Let's see. Let's see what other questions we have. Miriam sharing, if so, if you keep it up, would your next life be even better, or can you be born poor in one life and rich in another, no matter how you live in past lives, no matter how you live, if past lives are real, that is. I'll say this is I mentioned this a second ago. I think the general theme of Gilgul HaNefashot is not so much if you live a good life, will you live a better life next time? Although that could be an incidental outcome, the notion is if you live a good life in this world, after some stay in Gan Eden, you might get picked as a tzaddik to come back and live an even better life, or live a life. It's not about so much like riches or poverty. It's more like if you do good work in this world, if you prove yourself in that way, you could get picked to come continue to do good work in another life as well. And so it's much more service oriented, I'll say, than people getting rewarded in a material sense. So that's my take on it from what I've read. So I suppose it would depend on how you want your next life to be, I guess. It's less like you're storing up material wealth and it compounds into the next life. It's more like spiritual wealth, or mitzvah wealth, if you will. But again, what I love about this notion of Gilgul HaNefesh is if you're coming back, it's because God sees that this world is the place where mitzvahs are done. Heaven is nice, but angels don't do mitzvot, right? Angels or souls in Gan Eden don't get to affect this world, don't get to put those pieces of the vessels back together. Only living humans can. And so I really appreciated the learning that I've done to prepare for this today. I've learned a few new things as well. Again, it's just because I have students who ask great questions. So thank you all for being here today. We're going to end this. We're going to end this broadcast right now. If you're just seeing me for the first time, we've got a lot of videos like this and some much shorter ones as well. So appreciate people's patience with the shaky microphone. That's the third day in a row we've had some technical difficulties. So have to maybe go back to the drawing board on the studio setup. In any case, super grateful to all the heroes who came here to learn with me today, to ask your great questions. And until next time, heroes, peace.